What's up, guys? So I've been getting requests to start doing a little bit more like Land Rover specific maintenance videos. You know, I've had this truck for about 10 years. It's been pretty damn good to me, but it takes a little bit of time and effort and work to keep these things up and running. It's a 20-year-old truck. You know, Land Rovers don't have the best reputation for being reliable, but in my experience so far, this truck has actually been pretty damn reliable. A lot of people neglect the maintenance on them, and that's really where these things get their bad reputation from. So with that being said, we're doing something that's very common on these 4-liter and 4.6-liter Land Rover V8s today. We're replacing the front cover seal. So I got a pretty significant oil leak out of the front of the engine. This truck has 186,000 miles on it. The motor's got about, 60,000 miles on it. But the crank pulley is the original crank pulley. And as we get it apart, you'll see there's a pretty good groove in it. So it's a very simple job to do. So I'm going to walk you through it. I already got it apart, and I already got the new seal installed, but I thought about making this video and I was already about halfway through it. But really, guys, it took me about 20 minutes to take it apart, and it's going to take me about 20 minutes to get everything prepped, and it's going to take me about 20 minutes to put everything back together. So it's a very simple job. You can do it in your driveway with simple basic hand tools. So speaking of tools, let me show you what it requires to do this job, and then I'll walk you through the steps step by step. All right, guys, so you don't need anything super special to do this job, but there's a couple things that are gonna make this job a lot easier, and there's one tool that kind of is a requirement for this job, okay? So first thing you need a ratchet with a 10mm socket. You're gonna need a ratchet or a breaker bar with a 15/16 socket, a Phillips screwdriver. I use this little brass hammer to tap the seal back in. You're gonna need a fan belt. I'm sorry, not a fan belt, but a fan clutch removal wrench. And then I have my serpentine belt removal tool. This is not required. You can just do it with a regular 15mm socket. But this a little bit longer handle gives you a little bit extra leverage. The next thing you're going to need that you're not going to have is the Land Rover special tool. Well, shout out to my buddy Wally. He knocked this out for me super quick. And we were talking about, it's like, man, I don't know how I'm going to hold the crank pulley in place. What? Oh, shit. All right, I had to cut the video there. My wife told me my timer went off. I'm smoking some ribs on the grill. Had to move them around real quick. But anyways, so what I was saying with this is a tool that my buddy Wally knocked out for me real quick. We were talking about, man, how am I going to hold the crank pulley in place when I break it loose? Now, to break it loose is pretty easy. You can actually take the breaker bar and rest it on the frame rail, which I'll show you here in a second, and crank the key over real quick, and it'll break the bolt loose. But putting it back together, it's pretty high torque spec. I believe it's 160 foot-pounds is what you need to torque it. So we came up with this quick little thing. We found some dimensions online. He just drilled it out of a piece of angle iron for me real quick while I was at work. So Wally, you're the best, buddy. I appreciate you. So that's how we'll hold the crank pulley in place. You can use it to loosen it or tighten it, but in this case I'm just going to use it for tightening it. All right, and then you're going to need, in my case, don't know how this is going to show up on camera, but this crank pulley has a significant groove in it right there, and there's actually 3 grooves. So this crank pulley has 180,000 miles on it, so it's had a couple different seals, and those seals have worn a couple different grooves into the crank pulley. So with that being said, you need to pick up one of these SKF Speedy sleeves. The part number on this one is 99192. You get them, I got this off Amazon, I believe, for like 34 bucks or something like that. But we'll go over installing this in a little bit. And then when it comes to the seals, I try to use OEM stuff, but the Land Rover seal for this was like 40 or 50 bucks. I ended up picking this one up through O'Reilly's, but it's a mall, and actually it's a Victor Hines seal is what the stamping on it says. So there's your part number, 67841. That's your front cover seal. You can get these through Lucky 8, you can get them through Atlantic British, you can get them through wherever. I just need it in a hurry, and actually my local O'Reilly's had it in stock. It was like 15, 20 bucks or something. So that's the seal you need. All right, so let's go through the actual procedure. All right, guys, so this is a pretty straightforward installation of these parts. So I'm going to show you real quick on how to take it apart. It's pretty simple. If you've done any maintenance on your Land Rover at this point, you're probably familiar with some of the stuff, but if not, I'll try to show you a little bit in detail. One thing to note when you're doing this, we got to take the cover off the top of the radiator which is sitting right there. I'll show you here in a second. But be very aware, guys, of this plastic nipple coming out of your radiator. Be very careful with that you don't break that. And if you're still running the stock plastic pipe that runs from the overflow bottle to your radiator, I highly suggest you pick up a piece of hose and replace it with a piece of rubber hose instead of the plastic line, because those things by now are dry and brittle. I believe this is 5/16, and I bought the fuel line hose, so it's a lot more rigid and just seems to last a lot longer, but it runs from your overflow bottle over here to your radiator. So this cover right here goes on top of your radiator shroud with the radiator hose running underneath it. I'm trying to show you guys with one hand, it's gonna be a little bit difficult, but you got these little captured screws. You got one here, one here, one here, and one here. You just back those off a quarter turn and you lift up on your radiator hose and pop it out. My radiator hoses may look a little bit different than yours because I had the inline thermostat mod, but with that being said, it's still pretty simple. And then you lift that out of the way, and again, that attaches right here, right here, right here, and right there. So we'll lift that up out of the way. Guys, it's windy as hell out here today, and I hope it's not affecting the audio too bad. If it is, I'm very sorry. All right, so once we get the radiator cover off, the next step is to break your fan loose, okay? So there's a couple different ways to do this. So your fan's gonna be attached to the water pump via this nut here. So you get one of these fan clutch removal tools and you place it on there, and it is regular right-handed threads, so lefty loosey, right? So towards the passenger side if you're here in the United States. So you're gonna set that on there. If you're lucky, you can give this a good whack with a rubber mallet and it'll break it loose. So what I have done is I've modified this. It's like a garage door winding rod, but I can get down there on the water pump pulley bolts and kind of grab a hold of it. So I'll just kind of grab a hold of the water pump pulley bolt and then the stout of the water pump, and then you can just kind of take the pulley off. Then once your fan's out of the way, you lift your fan up and out. I have this plastic tote lid in here protecting my radiator. I was messing around on another discovery I had, and one of these spring clamps on one of the radiator hoses got away from me. I poked a little pinhole in the radiator. So whatever you can do to put in front of the radiator to protect it while you're working down here is a really good idea. Piece of cardboard, whatever. Just happens, this tote lid just happens to fit down in there perfect, right? So once we get the fan out of the way, then we can take our serpentine belt removal tool. This is a 15mm socket. It goes right here on your pulley, and the camera's kind of in the way right now, but all you do is get it on there and then pull towards the driver's side, and that'll loosen your tension. You can take your belt off. Just make a note of your belt routing when you're putting it back together. Once you're there, now it's time to take the crank pulley off. You can take a breaker bar with a 15/16 socket, and you can set it on the crank pulley, and there's a perfect spot right here in front of the steering box down the frame rail where you can rest this on the frame rail and just hit the key real quick. If you're not quick enough on the key, the engine will start. You want to happen, so you can pull your fuel pump relay, or you can pull your ignition relay out of the relay box so the truck doesn't actually crank over. But if you just hit it one time and back the key off, it'll break that loose. If not, that's where this special tool can come in. If you're not comfortable doing that, you can take this tool and run 2 5/16 bolts into the crank pulley, and then you can use this to hold it and break the crank pulley loose. Once you do that, the crank pulley just slides straight off the end of the crankshaft, and then this is where we run into where we're going to need to re-sleeve this, and then change, matter of getting it as clean as you can, and then changing the seal out. So the other special tool you need for that is a seal puller. You pick these up at any of your regular auto parts stores. You don't absolutely need this, but it does make it a lot easier. You can hook this in there on the crank pulley, or I'm sorry, on the crank seal, and you can pry the seal out. Be very careful not to score the aluminum front housing, so just make sure you're grabbing the seal and not the inside of the cover, and just rock the seal out. It should come out with just a little bit of force, but it shouldn't come out real hard, and then you'll have the seal out. So this is what the seal looks like, and it is going to damage the seal with the seal puller when you yank it out. But you see you got one side that's kind of closed, and there's a little spring inside there. That spring is actually what holds tension against your crankshaft, keeps it from leaking. A crank pulley, I'm sorry. Right, so once the seal comes out, clean up that front cover the best you can. Take your new seal, make sure you got a little bit of grease on the inside of this lip, and you can set it in place. You should be able to get it started by hand. It should just kind of start to slide in there a little bit. But once you get in there, you can take your old seal, and I like this little brass mallet just because it's small and get in there. But you just go around the seal and tap it in until it bottoms out in the cover. Just be very careful with the new seal that you're not damaging it in any way. Take very special care to not damage this inside lip or where that spring rides in there. Make sure that's all in place, but literally just tap the seal back in place until it bottoms out in the cover. Then you're ready to put the sleeve on the crank pulley and then put it all back together. So we're gonna head over to the press right now, and we'll get the sleeve pressed onto the pulley, and I'll show you the process of putting it back together. All right guys, so here is the SKF Speedy sleeve. Basically what it's going to do, you're going to set it on the crank pulley, and it comes with this little installation tool that we're going to set on here, and we're going to use a press to press this down on here. Do not attempt to do this by tapping it on with a hammer. I promise it's not going to work. It's too tight of a fit. If you don't have press or you don't have access to a press, all you do is take it to a local machine shop or probably a local automotive shop, and they'll have what you need, and they'll be able to do it for you for just a few bucks. It's not super complicated. But do not try to press this on or tap this on with a hammer. I promise you it's not going to work, right? We're just going to take it till it bottoms out. Does not take a lot of pressure. And there's your new sleeve, so that gives that the seal a new surface to ride on. And you're ready to go. Alright guys, so Speedy sleeves installed. I'm going to put a very, very light film of oil on this. Just very thin coat, just kind of help protect it, help protect the seal as I'm putting it on there. And that's it. Remember though guys, you have to press this on there. Do not try tapping on with a hammer. I tried doing that myself. This has this little ring that drives the seal in place, or the sleeve in place, but that's also meant in situations where that doesn't need to be there, where you can break it off. So it has this little seam. If you try tapping it on, you end up putting a little too much force on it, and that'll separate, and then the sleeve will be stuck wherever it is. So press is definitely the way to go about doing this. Now there is a keyway in this crank pulley that you need to get lined up. Go ahead and slip the pulley on the crank pulley, and I kind of like giving it a little twist as I go into the seal. Don't know if y'all can see that or not, but there's the keyway, and there you go. Crank pulley is installed. So it's a little odd to get the camera angle on that, but that'll go in and you'll feel it hit bottom, and once it's in there, it's in there. It's time to put the bolt on and put her back together. There's no real good way to show this. We'll go ahead and get our crank pulley bolt back in the crank pulley. Make sure you got that big washer on there. You'll run that down by hand. Alright, so the next step is going to be installing our tool, our special tool. So you need to figure out where the bolts are on the crank pulley, and then line it up, and then your bolts will go through here, and then this is where you'll access it with the socket. Probably not going to be able to see, but you have two bolt holes in the crank pulley, and I can see them right here. Go ahead and get our tool up in there. I may have to rotate the crankshaft a little bit to get these bolts in there. That's where you got a decent bite and plenty of room to work. It's not super tight quarters, but it's not, ain't a ton of room in there either. Alright. And those bolts that I'm using have a 7/16 head on them. A lot of times with a 5/16 bolt, they'll actually have a 1/2 inch head on it. You want to make sure the bolts aren't too long, that they don't hit the dust shield on the back of the crank pulley. Alright guys, so there is our homemade tool installed on the crank pulley. So these are two 5/16 bolts with the hole drilled in it. I will leave the specs in a picture here so y'all can see how this tool works. So now we just got to reference the shop manual, figure out what the torque spec is, and tighten the bolts to torque spec. So here's the factory service manual. So this is what the factory tool looks like. This is just our take on it. Sitting right here, front crankshaft pulley bolt tightened to 200 foot-pounds. Alright, so I got the torque wrench on there. I added a pair of vice grips on the end of the piece of the angle iron, give me a little bit more leverage. Now we're going to torque this thing to 200 foot-pounds. Ay, ay, ay. Yeah. Alright guys, so the next step is we got the crank pulley on and torqued in place. Now it's time to put the auxiliary belt back on. I'm going to try to do this from memory, but consult your rave manual for sure, your factory service manual. I believe I remember how it goes. As we're having that extra leverage of the serpentine belt tool comes in handy, because it allows you to kind of not have to strain so much to get everything lined up. Alright, so got the belt back on, around the crank pulley, up around the power steering pump, around the idler, around your AC, down around your water pump, pump over the alternator, around your tensioner, around the other idler, back down to the crank pulley. I got that good, we can go ahead and put the fan back on. So one of the things about owning a Land Rover, guys, is keeping up on stuff. Okay, so back in October, I broke my motor mount at Beasley Knob. In the course of that, the fan was rubbing on the radiator shroud, and the fan has some scuff marks in it now. Now this is a 99 to 02 fan on my 03. The 0304s have a one-piece fan and clutch, and then the 9902s have this two-piece fan. Well, these are notorious for cracking and coming apart, so it's really, really important that you keep an eye on this fan. And I just happen to have a second one that I'm going to be installing, and this is an OEM Land Rover fan. This is not a cheap replacement. This isn't a Brit part or, you know, one of those cheap replacement parts. This is an OEM Land Rover fan. So there are some parts in these trucks that you can get, that you can buy cheap. There's other parts you don't want to skimp out on. This is one of those parts. So I'm going to go ahead and switch my fan clutch over to the new fan. I'll keep this as a spare, knowing that it's scuffed up, but it still works. I've been driving on it really since October, just been trying to keep an eye on it. So we'll get my fan clutch switched over to this fan, and then we'll get the fan back on the truck. All right, give myself a little bit more room. I unhooked the mass airflow sensor and scooted it over. It's going to be a little bit different on your truck if you don't have this inline thermostat mod. If you don't, you should. So just get this fan slipped down under there, line it up with the water pump, and then just take your time. It'll eventually grab and will eventually start. Kind of like getting my hand out here in front of it. There you go. Run it down until it's tight. There you go. And the reason I only switched the fan and not the fan and the clutch is I just replaced this fan clutch not very long ago, so it's still in really good shape. But if you are replacing the fan, it's a good idea to replace the fan clutch as well. Go ahead and slip our wrench down there on the fan. I'm gonna give it a couple good taps, the rubber mallet, and that's good enough. So our fan is installed. Go ahead and hook our mass airflow sensor back up. Be very careful with these clips on your air boxes, especially as they get older. That plastic becomes pretty brittle. And I unplugged this earlier, so we'll plug our mass airflow sensor back in. Make sure it's good. All right. So our fan is back on, our belt is back on. We'll go ahead and pull our radiator protector out of there. Grab our fan shroud. So this you'll lift up on this hose, tuck this down in here. Keep an eye on these 4 screws. They are captive, sort of, but doesn't mean you can't pop them out of there, right? Go ahead and set our radiator hose back down in place. And again, these screws down here are a 1/4 turn. They're back in. Like I was saying earlier, guys, this is going to look a little bit different than on yours if you have that plastic line that runs from your overflow bottle to your radiator. I got rid of that a long time ago because I don't like it. I have no plastic hard lines in my cooling system. They're all rubber. I have these little clips. To be honest with you, I can't remember where they came from. They are from Land Rover, somewhere under the hood. But I just repurposed them from a couple of my parts trucks. But you can find these kind of things online. Just holds it there in place. So got the upper radiator hose back in place. Everything's back together there. As we're talking about Land Rover maintenance, and this is kind of a maintenance deal, because I've tapped into the oil system and I've kind of taken the pulley off, maybe introduced some dirt stuff in there, I am going to do an oil change. I run these K&N 3001 oil filters. It's about double the capacity, maybe 50% more capacity than the stock oil filter, and works without any modifications, any issues. So there's a Mobile One version of this, and don't quote me on this, but I think it's Mobile One 301, something like that. But that's the oil filter that I'm going to run. Always have, always will. Like I said, gives you a little bit extra oil capacity. And then the only oil I run in this truck is Shell Rotella T4 15W40. I've taken enough of these engines apart. I have seen what conventional normal motor oil looks like when you pull valve covers and stuff, and I have seen the inside of these engines that run exclusively Shell Rotella T4. There's something about the detergent factor in this that just keeps the inside of the engine clean, well lubricated, and it also has a higher zinc content, which you need for this motor because this still is an old school flat tablet camshaft. So run Shell Rotella T4 in your truck. It'll last a long time, guys. That's the only oil I'm ever going to put in this truck. So all right, let's get this thing finished up. All right, guys, once you get it done, just do a quick systems check, run the truck, make sure there ain't nothing leaking, and you're all done. This concludes this video. Thanks for watching, guys. See you in the next one.